Shut up and sit down.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. This is episode number 14 of the Baseball and Beer podcast. I, for one, am pretty shocked that it's gone this far, but can't really complain there. Anyway, I'm Brendan Bowes. Again, this is episode 14 of the Baseball and Beer podcast. Thank you for listening in. It's always a pleasure to do this and bring my opinions of my two favorite things in the world, baseball and beer, out to you guys, my listeners. Okay, so it's time to run through the drills on how to get in touch with me and contact the Baseball and Beer podcast. If you want to send the email, it is baseballbeerpodcast@gmail.com. Again, baseballbeerpodcast@gmail.com. If you want to join my Facebook group, I tend to post some baseball opinions, baseball questions, pictures of beer, questions about beer. I run through the gamut of everything there. If you want to join, again, obviously there's no charge. Facebook.com/baseballbeerpod. If you are a Twitter head, it's @baseballbeerpod. And finally, if you want to have a listen to previous episodes, or, well, that's pretty much it. If you want to listen to previous episodes, you can find everything at baseballandbeerpodcast.blogspot.com. Again, baseballandbeerpodcast.blogspot.com. Again, that's where you would find previous episodes. That's where I post all the new ones as well. If you're not subscribing to me on iTunes, which you certainly can do that as well if you would like. There's really not much to talk about outside of baseball and beer this week. I mean, really, I made a trip to Canopy Lake Park. First time I've ever gone up there in the border of New Hampshire. It's an interesting place. It reminds me of Quasi, which if you grew up in the Newtown area, it makes sense. If not, it's a tiny park by Quasi Lake, and it had one roller coaster, maybe two, but the one roller coaster was this quick one, two-person car, and the big thing was that it would swing around the lake, and it would whip you around so fast sometimes you thought that the car was just going to go fly off into the river. But Canopy Lake is a bit bigger than Quasi was. A lot more stuff to do. For being in southern New Hampshire, it's easy to get to from anywhere in the Boston area. So I enjoyed it. Not much else to say. Wouldn't go out of my way to get there again. But certainly if I was invited, I'd probably go back up there because it was a good time. I've also started dabbling. Well, dabbling's not the right word. I'm about 30 years too late, but I've hopped on the comic bandwagon. Bought myself a couple of Batman comics the other day, or graphic novels. I'm still not 100% sure, when it comes to the DC and Marvel stuff, what's constituted as a graphic novel and what's constituted as just a bunch of comic issues put together and sold as one. But bought a couple of Batman stuff. I got Year One, which I went through, and I am currently reading The Dark Knight Returns. Year One's interesting. I mostly got into comics because I'm a big fan of the villains in the movies, in the X-Men movies, the Avengers movies, the independent, Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, that sort of thing. Especially Batman and Superman. I always thought that those villains were very interesting, which is why I wanted to read the comics. Year One doesn't have any villains any of the big name villains, but it was still interesting, a good way to introduce how Batman became who he was. But I was hoping for a bit more in terms of villains, didn't get it. Otherwise, it was still pretty solid. Like I said, I'm in the middle of Batman Returns. Uh, it's still interesting. It looks like Joker is the main villain. It's also been teasing of Two-Face, so curious to see how that goes. I also have, borrowing from a friend, I also have the Infinity Gauntlet series from Marvel, so looking forward to that. He really sold me on what Thanos is going to be like in the movies, and that I should read the comic just to get a good idea of what we're all going to be in for once the Infinity Wars happen in terms of the Avengers. Quick note, I just realized that I called it Batman Returns when actually it should be The Dark Knight Returns. So just anytime I just said Batman Returns, substituted for Dark Knight Returns. Thank you. Beer is good, beer is good, beer is good. It's not. So yesterday was the first Tuesday of August, which meant that it was the monthly meeting of the beer club that I'm part of at the British Beer Company. So this month they brought in Samuel Smith, um, a beer that I've seen everywhere, but I never really had any of it because it just didn't seem like something I would enjoy. But as you'll soon find out, that was uninformed of me, very much uninformed of me. I think it had to do with the fact that they're British, like actual British beer, so I tend to think that everything gets served warm, so the quality of the beer is going to be for those who like warm, room temperature beer, whereas over here in America, we like our beer frozen, or ice cold rather, so that's where the discrepancy was, at least. Anyway, the first beer that they sampled for us was their organic lager, and it's your typical lager, very solid beer, nothing spectacular. Um, it's akin to Jack's Abbey lager. It's the most basic beer you can make outside of a regular ale, so there's really not much to say about it. But it was solid. It was very solid, something I like, and it just went on from there. Next up was the Nut Brown Ale, which is probably the one beer that I've seen everywhere in all the packies and beer stores that I've gone to from Samuel Smith. Again, it was one that I never had just because of the stigma of it being an English ale. But of course, the representative kept on saying that it wasn't made with nuts. It was named for the fact that due to the malt that they used, it had the roasted nut feel to it, the roasted nut taste, and he was very correct. It was a nice, solid brown ale, very malty, very little hoppy taste to it, very strong, like I said, malt taste to it, and there was a good. This is gonna sound weird. It had a good nut taste to it, so it was a lot better than I expected it to be. Very solid, and if I do see it, or when I see it, I'll probably grab a bottle of it because it was something I enjoyed. The third beer that was offered to us was their Yorkshire Stingo, Stingo, rhymes with bingo. And the way it was explained was that these guys have been brewing beer for well over 100 years, but they don't throw out their barrels that they use. So they use wooden barrels for their beers, and what they'll do is that when they brew this Stingo beer, they age it in those 100-year-old barrels that's been used for other types of beer, 50 years ago, 60 years ago, 75 years ago, and so forth. So it kind of has a flavor of everything in it, and it's an interesting concept, and it's a very solid beer. I know I liked it. I don't. It's kind of tough to explain outside of that. It's just it had a very strong taste once you first put it in your mouth, but as you how do I phrase this? As you taste it, it became more smooth and much more enjoyable. So it's a very solid drink, based upon a very weird but smart idea at the same time. Basically, it was like having a chocolate pudding type beverage, and then it turns into a sour. It's probably the best way I can explain it. After that, we had something called the Celebrator, which is from actually another brewery, a German brewery called Brauerei Enning, Aying, and the Celebrator is a double bock. So, which, if you are unfamiliar with double bocks, it's more of a strong malty taste rather than a hop taste. So, if you know me, it's more down my alley than anything. So, it's I mean, a double bock is a double bock. The malt was delicious. It was very heavy, very dark and deep. Certainly not a summer beer. This was definitely one that I would love to have more in the fall, winter times where it's cold, and I was able to enjoy it. But it's too heavy for the summer. That's not to say you shouldn't have it if you see it. By all means, drink it. But if you really want to enjoy it, I would wait until the fall or winter to thoroughly appreciate its taste and the heavy malt, dark malt flavor that it brings. The next thing that we tasted was the brewery's Oktoberfest Marzen, which I don't know. It's August, the beginning of August, and we're trying Oktoberfest beers. So I don't know. I don't have a strong opinion on this type of thing, but really it can get annoying when it's April and summer shandies are being sold. But anyway, it's an Oktoberfest. It's very spicy. Not spicy. What's the word? Okay, spicy, but not like jalapeno or habanero spicy. Like it's full of spice. Like nutmeg, that sort of thing. I got out of that one. Um, it's again these British, European beers tend to be more malty than hoppy. That's just their tradition. So this was their Oktoberfest is another malt beer. It's an amber beer full of malts. It's very solid. I wasn't blown away by it, but October beers aren't my thing. I like the Dogfish Head Pumpkin Ale, maybe Shipyard's Pumpkin. Outside of that, the October beers just aren't my thing. There's not much else to say, but I do it all for you guys, my listeners. I know you guys must turn to me for all your beer tasting, so gotta do what I can to make sure that you guys can appreciate what I'm doing for you. The last thing that we had was Sam Smith's organic chocolate stout, and wow, this was probably my favorite one out of the bunch. If it When it comes to chocolate stouts, this was probably one of the best ones out there, simply because it tastes like they just melted a Hershey bar and somehow put alcohol in it, because that's what it is. That's what it tastes like. And um, other chocolate stouts do have the deep malt flavor to it, so you can taste the stuff outside of the chocolate, which certainly not a bad thing to me. But it was eating a chocolate bar that had alcohol in it, and it was amazing and delicious, and it was the perfect way to end this tasting because it's just phenomenal. It was like I said, it was my favorite one out of the bunch. I'm definitely keeping my eye out for a bottle of this because it's perfect. It's just one of those beers that you can get and then mix it with like a fruit flavored beer. Can't think of a good one off the top of my head, but it's certainly one that you could mix together and have a delicious fruit chocolate beer. And that's something it's worth a shot giving it a whirl on my end whenever I will, or whenever I can rather. So something to keep your ears open for whenever I try that out. But Sam Smith was a very solid brewery. If I ever make the trip across the pond, as they say, I'll be sure to check out their brewery because it seems like a very interesting place. Very creative minds there, and I'm glad that they were able to make it and able to provide us some samples of their beer, as always. As of right now, really not sure who's going to be there next month, but the way they're going, it's going to be someone good.
Single, double, triple, home run. For the celebration, I'll shoot my gun.
So it took until the end of July / beginning of August, but finally went to my first baseball game of the season. I fully blame the people who scheduled the games, just because it wasn't until the White Sox showed up in Boston. So that was the one series that I was looking forward to, and it finally happened. And I was actually really looking forward to the game just because of the simple fact that the White Sox were doing extremely well. By the time the game was rolling around, they had swept Cleveland in 4 games and then traveled over to Boston and beat them 3 games in a row pretty handedly too. I mean, none of the games were really close, and the White Sox were just beating up the baseball. So things were looking good. Chose the last game of the series only because it was Chris Sale Day, so kind of figuring the way they were dominating with Chris Sale going on the mound that I was going to witness the second sweep in a row. Needless to say, that didn't happen. If you watched the game, you know it was a total mess. Chris Sale's part. He started off pretty strong, but he ended up getting hit in the leg with a comebacker. It looked like it was the ankle, but I haven't watched a video since then, so I can't confirm that. But after that, it got weird because he added about 2 or 3 miles per hour to his fastball, but I don't think he lost his movement somehow, because after that he was just getting pounded on. He gave up, I believe it was 7 runs, way too many hits, but he had a good number of strikeouts. Yeah, it was 7 strikeouts and 1 walk, which is extremely solid for any pitcher. I mean, this is a down game for Chris Sale, and it's still 7 strikeouts, 1 walk, but 12 hits, 7 runs all earned. They were just beating him up, and it was sad to watch. Really disappointed that I wasn't able to see a typical Chris Sale start, and the weather wasn't really helping things either. The game was delayed for about an hour, scheduled for a 7:10 start, but first pitch wasn't until 8. The rain didn't really hold up throughout the game. It kind of went on and off. Started to come down really hard at some points too, but they didn't do another delay after the game started, which to their benefit, thankfully they did that basically. Really disappointing game, although I did see a Jose Abreu home run for the first time in person, so that was nice. Not much else to say about that, except for, again, need to voice my disappointment on the White Sox. After a great 7 games before that, they totally dropped the ball, and I guess it was my fault. What can I say? Speaking of the White Sox, they have been sucking since this game. After the Red Sox game, they came back home for the Yankees, and the Yankees actually, Chicago beat the Yankees, I think, the first game of the series, and then proceeded to just not play baseball. It was sad and embarrassing. Yesterday, Chris Sale lost again, and it gave up another 7 runs. Things are looking bad again. So thankfully the White Sox were not buyers at the trading deadline, because that would have been awful. Still looking somewhat positive about the future, but they're just right now they're just not looking like a good baseball team, or a baseball team period. Again, it's one of those things where there's not much else to say, but I just want to keep on bad mouthing them because that's really how I feel. In other baseball news, the trading deadline has come and gone. I know last week I went over a couple of the big trades that had happened before the deadline had ended. But now that we're well past that, let me just take a quick rundown of some of the bigger trades that happened after last week's podcast. So one of the big ones was Cole Hamels going from the Phillies to the Rangers for a whole boatload of players. Let's see. Yes, the other big one was David Price getting traded from the Tigers to the Blue Jays for three pitchers, all left-handers. So looks like that. Speaking of the Tigers, they released or came to a mutual agreement with their previous general manager, Dave Dombrowski, in terms of his release from general managing duties of the Tigers. So everything's a bit confusing with over there in Detroit, but whatever, they can suck as much as they want to, as long as it helps the White Sox. Let's see, Yankees acquired Dustin Ackley from the Mariners for two guys. I have no idea who they are. Dodgers, Braves, and Marlins have a 13-person trade going on here. Dodgers get a whole bunch of people. They get Matt Latos, Alex Wood, Jim Johnson, Bronson Arroyo, Luis Avelin, Mike Morse, Jose Peraza, and cash considerations. Braves get from this trade Hector Oliveira, Paco Rodriguez, Zach Bird, and a competitive balance pick. And the Marlins acquire Kevin Guzman, Jeff Brigham, and Victor Araujo. Most of these guys I don't know who they are. Most of the guys that the Dodgers got I'm familiar with, like Latos, Wood, Johnson, Arroyo, Mike Morse are all people I'm familiar with. So I think the Dodgers probably just wanted pitching, as that was their weak point, even though they have two of the best pitchers in the league right now. The drop off after them is pretty huge. Let's see. Astros get Carlos Gomez from the Brewers, so they now have one of the most solid teams out there. It's pretty interesting how it's going to play off there in the AL West. Orioles get Geraldo Parra from the Brewers. I'm just scrolling through here. Cubs get Dan Herron from the Marlins, another pitcher for their hopeful playoff push. Blue Jays also got Ben Revere. For his defenses, he's not the best hitter out there. It's fast. That's about it. Oh yeah, Mets also got Jonas Cespedes from the Tigers. Tigers were all out buyers, or sellers rather, loading up on their farm system, and the Mets Mets are first place, which is impressive. Them and the Blue Jays are my two teams that I'm rooting for outside of the White Sox, bearing a miracle on their end. But Mets and Blue Jays are the two teams that have a decent playoff chance, and I'm actually rooting for going forward. So looking forward to Cespedes destroying Citi Field with his bat. Not a whole lot going on after that. Yeah. But I mean, there were trades, but nothing spectacular like a David Price or Troy Tulowitzki type name going on. So those are the big trades going on, and White Sox did nothing, which was expected. But hopefully during the off season they start making some moves. Now, for August, let me rephrase that. August 31st is the end of the waiver trade period, and what this means is that you can still make trades. However, the players involved in these trades have to pass through waivers, and going through waivers is a pretty complicated process. I don't even know the full. I'm not 100% familiar with it. Basically, from what I know, you put the guy on waivers, basically saying, we want to get rid of this guy, put a claim in for him so we can work something out. Teams then decide if they want to take this guy, depending on what Team A is looking for in return, and they put in a claim, basically saying, hey, we're interested. Then from there, the team with the worst record in the league gets first dibs, or not even first dibs, gets dibs. So they get to work with the team that put the player on block or on waivers to either make a deal, or the other team, the original team can pull the guy back from waivers. So, for example, let's say the White Sox put Tyler Flowers on waiver. A team will put in a claim, and then from there, the White Sox and that other team can make a deal. Either they can just send Tyler Flowers over, the other team takes his contract, and that's that. or the other team could put a guy through waivers that the White Sox want, and assuming that he goes through with no problem, then they make a trade. Also, I mean, there's other various things that can be done for a waiver trade. Those are one of the things that I'm not 100% familiar with, but that's what's going on for the rest of the month. This is how the White Sox acquired Manny Ramirez a couple years ago from the Dodgers. Probably one of the bigger names that's gone through on waivers. It's really not a time period where big names get sent through, but just as a heads up to everyone, because I know the media loves milking this, if you read that your favorite player is going through waivers right now, it doesn't mean anything. It's usually done as a strategy so that the person that they want to move through waivers can get through waivers. So, for example, Chris Sale will probably be put on waivers just because there's no point in moving him during the waiver period. But that doesn't mean anything. The White Sox aren't unhappy with Chris Sale or anything like that. It's just a strategic move. Every team does it. It's not a big deal. So I just wanted to get that out of the way, because I know what's going to happen towards the end. It's usually not fun to read, but happens every year. I'm going to try to stop it if I can. And that wraps everything up for episode 14 of the Baseball and Beer podcast. If you ever want to get in touch with me for whatever reason, the various ways to do so are as follows. On Facebook, it is facebook.com/baseballbeerpod. Try to ask questions, post pictures, try to get people involved. So if you're up for a conversation on either baseball or beer, then that's the place to go. If you like Twitter, I can be found at baseballbeerpod. If you want to send me an email, it is baseballbeerpodcast@gmail.com. Again, baseballbeerpodcast@gmail.com. I also have an Instagram account. I don't think I mentioned that at the beginning of the podcast, but I do have an Instagram account. I do try to stick to baseball and beer there too, but it's not the podcast account. It's my own account, but same thing. So if you want to follow me, it's Bowzie70, BOWZIE 70. Anyway, also if you want to check out previous podcasts, previous episodes, or just want the website as to where I post these as they are released, place to go is baseballandbeerpodcast.blogspot.com. If you don't have iTunes, don't want to subscribe to me on there, then that's probably the best way to get these podcasts on a weekly basis. So I do try to release them every Wednesday. Timing is usually different, just depending on when I can sit down and have the microphone in my hand. But if you want to find any of the other previous 13 episodes, that's where you go. Again, thank you for listening to episode number 14 of the Baseball and Beer podcast. My name is Brendan Bowes, and I will catch you guys next week. As always, I don't have anything planned for next week. We will see what goes on then. Take care, guys.